Before I officially start, I wanted to say thank you again for being here this morning. As Alan alluded to a little bit, it's taken me over 2 years to try to find a little nugget to share. Um, we unofficially had our graduation, or as Richard Rohr says, our ungraduation in August of 2016, and I've been mulling over wanting to share, but not knowing how for a couple years. So thanks to Alan's pushing and that I'm here sharing this morning. So thank you for being here. Also, a couple thank yous to both my parents for their support during the time of childcare stuff, as I went to Albuquerque and Cody was there trying to figure out things. Also to Cody's parents, who I brought Silas with me a couple of times during the trips to Albuquerque over those 2 years, because he was little enough I couldn't leave him here. And so they came to Albuquerque and they helped with childcare for him during that time, and it was really a gift to have that support from all of them. And then, of course, from Cody, who I would not have been able to do this with without this kind of a program, without an incredibly supportive partner. So it was overwhelming support to be able to do this at a really crazy time in life. So thank you to all those. And also to thanks to, I don't think Loretta's here, but a couple people here who are Living School supports. Joanna Davidson-Smith, who you know, who was a 2017 cohort. And then Daryl Youngman, who's here in front, also lives in Wichita, along with Lorinda Wade is another. She's not here this morning, but they both were in my same cohort, 2016. And we met the second year of the program. Every month we get together and meet and share and support one another, and it was a real blessing to have them in town as we went through this together. So glad you're here. Ye have no time but this present time. Ye have no time but this present time. Ye have no time but this present time. Therefore prize your time for your soul's sake. Ye have no time but this present time. Ye have no time but this present time. Ye have no time but this present time. Therefore prize your time for your soul's sake. Ye have no time but this present time. Ye have no time but this present time. Ye have no time but this present time. Therefore prize your time for your soul's sake. This chant is so grounding for me to sing, either out loud or even just in my head, at moments in the day when I get so caught up in the doing of this and that, the rush, the busyness. The chant is called This Present Time, and it's part of a collection of chants performed by a Quaker musician named Paulette Meyer in her album, The Timeless Quaker Wisdom in Plain Song. She took a number of passages from Quaker writers and set them to music. The lyrics of this particular one were written in 1652 by George Fox, who's considered to be the founder of the Religious Society of Friends. And I just recently learned that Fox wrote these words as a letter to parents, which I find especially fascinating how relevant it is today. I was introduced to Paulette Meyer's chants by Cynthia Bourgeau, one of the core faculty at the Living School. Chanting is an important spiritual practice to Cynthia, and so at times she wove it into her Living School teaching. I have found it very useful as well. A little bit later this morning, we'll learn another chant, but for now, I'll let that one be. Why do we spend so many waking hours living trapped on the outer circumference of the inner richness of the life that we're living. I couldn't exactly put words to it, but Jim Finley's quote that I just read has been reverberating in my soul even before I began the Living School back in 2014. I will talk more about that in a bit, but before I go any further, let me briefly explain what the Living School is. It is a 2-year program with a Center for Action and Contemplation located in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The curriculum is grounded in the Christian contemplative tradition and mixes both at-home study with online courses and on-site intensives and symposiums held in Albuquerque. Over the course of the 2 years, we had 6 major units of study, and I believe they have them up there for you to see. Also, the first was an introduction to non-dual consciousness. A heavy thing we started with was The Cloud of Unknowing. It's a classic within the contemplative literature. We had just a little snippet. Cynthia started off, and she just gave us a little bit, but it was quite a way to start. So if you want to dig deep, this is one this is one you could read, but I would probably not start with that. The second unit was Human Incarnation, which they coincided, I think, deliberately with the Christmas season, and that was especially fascinating to have the depth of that unit coinciding with the traditional Christmas time. Third unit was Cosmic Incarnation, a bunch of stuff, as that may sound. In that unit, talked a lot about science and religion, which was very fascinating to me. One of the writers that I especially connected with was Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who is a French Jesuit and paleontologist. And he is quite the read, too, as far as a whole new way of looking at the connection between science and religion. The fourth unit was The Middle Way. The fifth was Mystical Traditions. And the last unit was Prophecy and Justice. I wish I had time to touch on each of these units this morning, but that's not possible. If any of these have intrigued you, though, or piqued your interest, I'd love to sit down with you and visit some more, so just let me know. The 3 core faculty members of the Living School and our main teachers were Richard Rohr, a Franciscan priest and an internationally recognized author and spiritual teacher, Cynthia Bourgeot, an Episcopal priest, writer, and internationally known retreat leader, and James Finley, a contemplative teacher, writer, and retired clinical psychologist who right after high school spent several years studying with the well-known monk Thomas Merton. Richard, Cynthia, and Jim are each modern-day mystics themselves, and they taught together in a seamless and beautiful way. It was an enormous honor and a privilege to work with them during those 2 years. Before I started the Living School in September 2014, I had been meditating and doing centering prayer off and on for over a decade, but I didn't seem to have much internal groundedness with it. I didn't often feel like I had a sense of why I was doing it. I hadn't really stuck. I have a strong sense of social justice from being raised within the Church of the Brethren, and I have experience as a community organizer. My experience within the world of social justice organizing showed me just how deep the divide is between action and contemplation. My heart knew, though, that there is an important, vital connection between action and contemplation, and yet they still felt somewhat separate for me, and I struggled with how to link them together in my life. When I learned of the Living School, something deep within me said yes. To be honest, I never really had an interest in attending any kind of seminary prior, but with the Living School, it felt different. I simply could not ignore the inner calling to apply to this underground seminary, as Richard likes to describe the school. And it really is. It's one of the strongest pulls I've ever had and I've ever felt in my life. The application process, too, as Joanna and Daryl may remember, was quite an application process, mainly essay-driven, and it really forced you to dig deep in your life for lots of areas of your life. So it was quite a process with that as well. I must also say that when I was accepted in the program, of which they were only able to accept about 250 people per cohort or group, out of close to 1,000 applicants at a time, I thought, oh boy, how am I going to do this? Jaron was 4, Silas was 14 months, and I had started my small business, Riverside Music Together, only a year prior. My life was very full. Regardless, I had to do it, and I had to find a way to make it work. My gut, my heart, my whole body said yes. One of the things that Richard said to us, even before we started and began the program, is that for many of us in the school, we were probably more doers by nature, which impelled us to even apply to the program to begin with. So the bulk of our time, at least in the beginning, would be focused on the contemplative side, and then eventually the full integration of action with contemplation. As I mentioned earlier, I've been familiar with aspects of the contemplative life, specifically that of centering prayer, for quite some time. Through the Living School, my understanding of the contemplative or inner life has vastly expanded. Prior to my participation in the Living School, I didn't use or even really know terms like non-dual consciousness or the evolution of consciousness, which may be new to many of you too. They are now integral to my understanding of and experience within Christianity. The Church of the Brethren does many wonderful things and is strongly focused on the action side of life, and I'm immensely grateful for the strong background I've had growing up with examples and stories of peace and social justice within the church and how that aligns with Jesus and Christianity. I did, however, feel that there was a lack, a hole in my life, and it was the inner life, the contemplative life. The church in general, including the Church of the Brethren, does not teach us how to develop and cultivate an inner contemplative life. Most of us don't have the tools to do this because they weren't taught to us either. Now, just to be clear, when I talk about inner or contemplative life, I don't just mean sitting in silence for a couple of hours a day and trying to be holy. In my current stage of life, I struggle to find, and Cody knows this well, even 20 minutes to have one sit a day and to find some degree of inner spaciousness. When we create a space to develop our inner selves, we're deepening and expanding our consciousness, little by little. James Finley has often said, "Be faithful to your practice, and your practice will be faithful to you." The term non-dual consciousness is most likely new, as I mentioned, to many of us. It simply means being in a space that doesn't split the field between right and wrong, good and bad, black and white, in and out, like, dislike, and so on. All of us experience little glimpses of this throughout our day, like when something catches our eye and we pause for even half a second longer than we normally would, when we see and experience beauty, when we see the colorful fall leaves cascading down from the trees, when we experience a smile or a hug from a friend. There are a myriad of moments like these throughout our days, but we so often miss them, and we go right back into our dualistic mind. Please know, too, that there's nothing inherently wrong with the dualistic mind. In fact, we need it in order to function as we go about our day, with all of our activities and responsibilities. However, for many of us, it's the only thing we know, and we stay there our whole lives. The human mind naturally functions within duality, and yet Jesus was a master of the non-dual or contemplative mind. He embodied and taught a path of transformation through the evolution of consciousness. When we talk about putting on the mind of Christ, we're talking about an actual transformation of consciousness, a whole new way of seeing the world around us. As Cynthia says, we're downloading a whole new operating system. She likes to use those analogies of computers and operating systems, which makes a lot of sense. We all have this capacity within us, and we know our world desperately needs a great leap forward in human consciousness. Jesus lived a life of letting go, of kenosis. The term kenosis was introduced to me by Cynthia, and it has been a very helpful tool for me in a variety of circumstances. The word itself comes from the Greek verb ekenosin, which means to empty oneself. It is the term used by St. Paul in his famous hymn, which you're familiar with, in Philippians 2, verses 6 and 7, when he writes, "Though his state was that of God, yet he did not deem equality with God something that he should cling to. Rather, he emptied himself, and assuming the state of a slave, he was born in human likeness." Cynthia says, It suggests a stance of non-entitlement, spaciousness, and humility. Rather than staking your own claim or advancing to your personal agenda, you simply widen space and create a place for something else to come into being. Another name for this universal spiritual practice is surrender. It is Jesus' simple but revolutionary practice for transcending egoic terror and breaking open a whole new level of human consciousness. She uses a simple physical gesture to remind us and help us practice kenosis. It's this. Take your hands. I'm going to have you do a couple things this morning, hopefully keep you awake. So take your hands, get a tight fist, and think to 3 in our head, and release. When you have a clenched fist, you have that tension. And when you release it, it lessens. Let's try it again. And for me, it's helpful to use my breath with it. So if we try it one more time and breathe in for the clenched fist and out with a release. And you can try, she says, you can try it big, way up here. You can try it small. You're in a meeting. You're waiting in line at the grocery store. All kinds of, lying awake in bed, not able to sleep. All kinds of situations. You're hanging on to something. It reminds us, let it go. Let it go. Let it go. So hopefully that is a tool that you can take with you and can use also. It's kind of a let it be gesture. We can all find times in our day when we need to let it be or let go of something we're holding on to. For me, it's times when I get caught up in my emotions, in my own agenda, or maybe my nostalgia of wanting my kids to stay in certain stages of life just a little bit longer. Don't. And I have reminded myself over and over again, let it go. It's the process. There's nothing you can do, and find the joy where they are now. But boy, I do it every day. So it's been really, really helpful. So I hope it is for you also. In fact, frankly, the whole aging process, I see as a letting go. We get older, we change. Let it go. It's a hard letting go. There are a lot of things that are hard letting goes. That's one of them. Another practice that is foundational for me is centering prayer. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been practicing centering prayer for close to 2 decades. Though I've certainly had on and off periods when it was more habitual than others. For example, the last 20 months or so, it's been tough. 20 months is how old Amos is, in case you hadn't caught that on. So since our 3rd child was born, it's been a little bit off kilter. But I have to say, though, for the 2 years that I was in living school, it was a rock, the foundation. And I was so grateful for that because I wanted it to be, and Cody heard me say so often, I want to be more regular. I want to, have it as part of a daily, not just, I forgot to do it today or whatever. And whether it was being in the school, it kept me there. I have never been more faithful to the centering prayer practice than during those 2 years. And I felt and experienced a shift and a change every day. They suggest twice a day. I could only get in one with my realities. But that one time a day was huge. And we've tried to keep it going as I was pregnant with Amos when I graduated. And I tried to keep it going after he's been born, and we're still working on getting the regularity back. But it ebbs and flows. For those who are unfamiliar with the Christian practice of centering prayer, it's the prayer of quiet. It has similarities to the well-known term meditation. And it's time for, as Jim Finley says, a little rendezvous with God. It is also a time when we get lots of practice with letting go, with kenosis. We want to do it right. We want to succeed at centering prayer. The thing is, there's no doing it right. There's none. It's just the doing it. It's simply the intention. Jim Finley says, a little fidelity with God goes a long way. And when we practice centering prayer, we practice releasing, letting go of the thoughts that busy our mind as we sit still. These thoughts are natural and normal. What are we going to have for supper? What are we going to do tomorrow? What did we do last week? And we go, just racing all the time. We practice kenosis when we just sit, during our sit, and it feels like failing because we're not doing it right. We have too many thoughts. They happen. And it may feel like we're doing nothing when we just sit, but we're actually retraining our brain. We are deepening and expanding our consciousness, our capacity to be in non-dual spaces of consciousness for longer and longer periods of time. It's active and important work. It has effects on us and on the people around us. Thomas Keating, a Trappist monk who died at the age of 95 just over a week ago on October 25th, was a pioneer in the contemplative movement within the Christian church. He has often said that for the hundreds of times we get distracted by our thoughts in a centering prayer sit, oh good, that's 100 opportunities to return to God. So he flips it in the positive. Centering prayer sits are often about 20 minutes. And I would like for us to experience some of the practice this morning. But don't worry, we won't do 20 minutes. Probably just about 3. You can work your way up if you want. During centering prayer, it's helpful to sit in a way that allows your body to be relaxed, yet your mind to be alert. And in this context, just sitting upright comfortably in the pews will be fine. Though I might encourage you to have your feet flat on the floor if they reach. If you're either on the back or front, not necessarily a big deal, but your feet uncrossed would probably be helpful. Whenever you become aware of a thought, no matter what the nature, even if it's the most amazing breakthrough in the whole entire world and you have to go with it, don't. Simply, gently let it go, saying your sacred word, which is a tool to bring you back from your thoughts and remind you of your intention in the practice. In choosing your sacred word, it is often helpful for it to be a short word, one that has meaning to you, maybe love, peace, Jesus, Yahweh, grace, mercy, something that can bring you back from your thoughts to your intention within their prayer practice, to rest in God and remain open to the silence. Sacred words are not mantras, as in constantly repeating them, but as a reminder of your intention to remain open. Give you a second to think of a word. Don't mull over it too much. Just pick one and go with it. Everyone have one? Yeah? Okay. I generally close my eyes during sit, and I encourage you to also. If you find it more comfortable to not close your eyes, that's fine. Just pick something in the room that you can focus your eyes on, rather than keeping your eyes wandering around the room. It may be the windows behind me. It may be the floor in front of you. Whatever works for you if your eyes are open, but I encourage you, like I said, to close them gently if you choose that. All right, we're going to do 3 minutes, and I'm going to ring the gong to start us, and I'll ring it again to end. Just keep in mind, you may feel like you're failing because your mind is racing. You are not. You are not. It's the doing. Let it be what it is. Remember your breath. That can be helpful also. 3 minutes. Oh, okay. Thank you. That may have felt like a really long 3 minutes if you're new to centering prayer. But since they do suggest if you do want to continue this practice, to start small. If this is new to you, start with 5 minutes. And then as you feel more comfortable, you can gradually work toward 20, which is a general number they suggest to settle with. One of the sacred words that I sometimes use during centering prayer is Yahweh. Richard has shared a story called the Yahweh prayer that some of you might be familiar with. It is a practice that has some similarities to the Jesus prayer that Alan talked about in his Alan's Angle back in March. The Jewish word for God, which is considered unpronounceable, is Yahweh, and is meant to replicate the breath, inhalation and exhalation. Let's try it 3 times. The breath can't be captured. It's the first thing we do when we're born and is the last thing we do before we die. Richard shared that a few years ago, he was at a conference of interfaith leaders and was explaining the Yahweh prayer. Afterward, a Sufi man came right up to him and a very excited look on his face and asked if he knew the Islamic name for God. Richard replied, "Yes, it's Allah." The man asked if he knew how to spell it. Richard said, "I think it's A-L-L''H. The Sufi man said yes and explained that when you have a second L, it's like an exclamation point, an emphasis, means the very. So the Islamic name for God is the very H, the very breath. The Sufi man said, "Do you see what this is saying?" Both of these ancient Mideast traditions recognize that God is like the air. God is our very breath, something we cannot capture or control. For Judaism, it is Yahweh, and Islam is the very breath. There is no Jewish way to breathe, no Christian way to breathe, no Buddhist, Islamic, or Hindu way to breathe. We speak the name of God simply by breathing, every day, all day. And bringing our attention to our inhalation and our exhalation, the Yahweh prayer can be a very helpful tool in humility, in bringing us back to our inner selves. I talked earlier about how important the connection between action and contemplation is, and about the great work that we know the Church of the Brethren is doing in the world. We also know the denomination is currently asking the question, does the Church of the Brethren have value today? Is it relevant? Absolutely. We need to keep doing the actions, the wonderful peace and social justice work that we currently are, and then some. However, we also need to link that with a contemplative inner life. Contemplation without action is simply navel-gazing. And action without contemplation is an inflated sense of righteousness and of our own agenda. We must connect and integrate the two in a meaningful and long-lasting way. The world desperately needs more integrated souls who can see, at least some of the time, outside of the dualistic frame we often live within. I'm sure it comes as no surprise that we are living in an especially polarized, hyper-dualistic country right now. Using spiritual tools that help us practice a new way of seeing and being in the world, tools that help us deepen and take greater leaps in our evolutionary consciousness, are actually very radical and critically important things to do. They are not in exclusion of all the wonderful justice-seeking work that we do in the world, but a complement and a partner that will strengthen that work. The world is full of what feel like moments, and reality is full of despair and anxiety, both around the world and in our own country. For example, we are 2 days away from an incredibly important national election. And by the way, as Carolyn mentioned, if you haven't yet, please go vote. Also, we recently heard a new report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on just how much the clock is ticking, on the chance to leave a livable planet for our children and our grandchildren. The renewed threat of nuclear war, the scapegoating of immigrants, refugees, and people of color, endless war and famine. The list could go on, and it feels rather daunting. How does a contemplative life have anything to do with fixing these urgent social concerns? It has everything to do with it. As I said at the end of our Living School Symposium, we are quantumly entangled, which is basically just a fancy word of saying that we are intrinsically linked and connected to one another on a metaphysical level that we can scarcely take in. What we do matters. How we do it matters. Our time spent in contemplative practices has ripple effects. Jesus asked us to follow him, and not just in his actions, but in his mind, his contemplative mind, both places. Mind is also in the heart. That's part of our task as Christians. Jim Finley asks the question, how do I take the well-worn ground and let it become so habituated that the next person I meet that needs my help is not some rude interruption into my mystical consciousness of God, but rather the depth of my contemplative consciousness, allowing me to see reflected in their eyes the presence of God. That's waiting for me in that encounter. This, then, is that intimate connection between mysticism and social justice. There's less and less difference between the way I am in solitary stillness and when I get change at the grocery store. How action and contemplation are integrated will look different for each of us. Action and contemplation are an interwoven dance, dependent on one another, but set to a different tune for each of us. I'm not here to say what things you should or shouldn't do. We know there are many opportunities for action and contemplative action. They are all around us when we learn and practice seeing in a new way. If you want an opportunity today, right after the service, there are some of these in the back. I don't remember, Alan, where they said that they were. Here. But they're in a pew back there. But it is actually a petition on change.org. I printed it off. That some current Living School students, as well as Jim, Cynthia, and Richard, wrote, called Barman Today, a contemporary contemplative declaration. It is a tangible way to link action and contemplation in our current day context. And the declaration is connected to a time in the 1930s when there was a similar one written. So I encourage you to take a copy of it, read it, and if you feel led, sign it on change.org in the back. Through time with contemplative practices, these glimpses of non-dual presence can become more integrated and frequent in our daily life. Thomas Merton, a well-known Trappist monk, mystic, writer, longtime teacher and mentor of James Finley, writes in his book, New Seeds of Contemplation, when we are alone on a starlit night, when by chance we see the migrating birds in autumn descending on a grove of junipers to rest and eat, when we see children in a moment when they are really children, when we know love in our own hearts, or when, like the Japanese poet Basho, we hear an old frog land in a quiet pond with a solitary splash. At such times, the awakening, the turning inside out of all values, the newness, the emptiness, and the purity of vision that make themselves evident, provide a glimpse of the cosmic dance. I will end our time this morning with a poem by Richard Rohr entitled And. After that poem, we'll have some time for reflection and response, and then for our sending, I will teach you a chant by Jim Reel called The Other. And by Richard Rohr. And teaches us to say yes, and allows us to be both and keeps us from either or, and teaches us to be patient and long-suffering, and is willing to wait for insight and integration, and keeps us from dualistic thinking, and does not divide the field of the moment, and helps us to live in the always imperfect now, and keeps us inclusive and compassionate toward everything, and demands that our contemplation become action, and insists that our action is also contemplative, and heals our racism, our sexism, our heterosexism, and our classism, and keeps us from the false choice of liberal or conservative, and allows us to critique both sides of things, and allows us to enjoy both sides of things, and is far beyond any one political party, and helps us face and accept our own dark side, and allows us to ask for forgiveness and to apologize, and is the mystery of paradox in all things, and is the way of mercy, and makes daily practical love possible, and does not trust love if it is not also justice, and does not trust justice if it is not also love, and is far beyond my religion versus your religion, and allows us to be both distinct and yet united, and is the very mystery of Trinity. We'll take just a few minutes. I think Ellen will have a mic that if there, you may certainly reflect internally. You do not, if there's something in your mind or heart, you're welcome to share that. If you have questions for me at any kind, you're welcome to ask those. If you want to sit and let it percolate, that's fine. But we'll take some time for that reflection and response.
Thank you, Erin, for that great presentation. That was a great sermon, and I know a lot of us here felt that. Just being here in quietness with all together, we all have, similar feelings about what we should be doing and what we want to do. And thank you for putting it in such educational and teaching form. Thank you.
There was a moment when you said something that you mentioned. You were talking about the Church of the Brethren, and then you mentioned action, and you mentioned contemplation. And that quote, when you read it, I wanted to say, "You can say that again," because I think that would
Which
you
one?
say it?
I don't know. About action and contemplation.
Contemplation without.
A contemplation without action
Mm-hmm.
is navel gazing. Is that the one?
Yeah.
And action without contemplation is an inflated sense of righteousness and of our own agenda.
Okay.
I would just like to add that with the Church of the Brethren, I think that we do have the contemplative piece, but we have long forgotten it.
Yeah.
We were a bridge, of Anabaptism, which is our activism side, and our pietist, which is the contemplative. And we have a lot of, the Brethren were influenced by, Jacob Boehme and, all these contemplatives that I think this
Yeah.
is not outside of our
Right, and
our
I will
denomination.
echo that.
If
So
we
thank you,
could
Joanna, because
tap into
I was
it.
talking about, I guess, more current. I know historically it's there, and it's there, frankly, within the history of Christianity, if you go back far back enough. Crazy history within Christianity. But there are, both within the Church of the Brethren and within the larger Christian church, it's there. It is foundationally there. It's that we had it, we lost it. 30 or so years ago, Thomas Keating was one of others who tried to revive it. So yes, thank you, Joanna, for lifting that up, because I don't mean to say that we don't have any contemplative nature, but it's that linkage isn't there, and then the at least in Nothing against how I was raised. It was wonderful, but we weren't taught to. There's pieces and connections that we weren't taught and that we didn't know. So it's bringing that back, as Joanna said, and teaching our kids, and also that teaching them the connection.
There's a daily devotional that Richard Rohr writes every day, and it's on the internet. And I know that you could maybe print that in the newsletter where people could download that. It's very, very thoughtful. I like to read it in the morning because it kind of centers your mind for the day. It's very challenging.
Yeah, that's my goal also. I don't usually get the chance to read it every day. Certainly not in the morning as we wake up and go about our day, but it is. And actually, that's the place that I first read, because I was getting those emails. That's where I first read about Living School. And I read it, and I stopped. And my gut, I just stopped. And I read it again and said, this is it. It was overwhelming. Sticks in your mind, too. Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate the window into the relationship between the contemplative and the action. I think that's something we struggle with. And I learned some of that contemplative, called it silent prayer, in my home. And did not see much of that in the corporate worship.
Right.
Either in the Methodist church or here. And would just like to say that it's during those contemplative times that I have received direct messages or revelation or direction that I say are from God.
What you mean to this congregation and your sharing. It's beautiful. You are a gift, a blessing.
Thank you. Yeah. So we could rest in just a moment more of silence, but it's okay. We can go on. I've held you here long enough. Okay. You can have your own silent time at home if you want. But as a postlude, I'm going to teach a chant by Jim Reel, who I learned when Cody and I went to a conference back in 2007 or 8 in Albuquerque, sometime around there. And it's called The Other. I'm going to sing it once, and then I'll do a call and response where I'll sing a phrase, you follow, and then you echo, and then we'll do it once more all together.
Thanks for watching this video from the First Church of the Brethren in Wichita, Kansas. If you'd like to watch another video, click the link on the right. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing on this video. And we'd love to have you join us on Sundays at 9:30 for Sunday school and 10:45 for worship. Everyone is welcome and you're invited.